emancipation of slaves in the county. So in other words, everyone who was a slave would remain a slave until they died. And their children were slaves until they reached 28 years of age. And then this act was passed in 1780. So there were still slaves in the area of Adams County for many years. But we do have these original records at the Adams County Historical Society also. I just thought I'd throw that in because I saw that you guys were interested in that in one of your publications. Now, the first official settler of this area was a guy named Hans Steelman. And Hans Steelman, John Hans Steelman, was Swedish stock. He was born in Philadelphia in 1655. He was an early trapper, a trader, and he was an Indian translator in Lancaster County, and he actually worked for the state of Maryland for a while. He is thought to have settled not far from here, about 3 miles on the other side of the mountain here, what we call Musselman's Hill, in 1718. He opened up a trading post along a well-established trail, probably the road from Emmitsburg over to Waynesboro. He was 63 when he arrived here. He was issued a warrant for 200 acres of land in 1740 from the state of Maryland. He died in 1749 at the age of 94. But he actually lived here when this was still part of Chester County. But he was living here through the Maryland years. He was not a settler actually from Pennsylvania. He came up through Maryland. There's a monument that was placed in 1924 at the intersection of Steelman Marker Road and Crum Road. And you can see they dedicated the monument. And today, apparently it got hit by a car many years ago. And in 1977, they put up another marker at the same spot and with the same rock, and it's still out there today, not far from here. So he's our first settler. Here is a 1770 map of this area. And just give me an idea, if you don't know, here is our temporary line for Maryland and Pennsylvania we're going to talk about. Here is York, Pennsylvania. In 1770, this would be York County, Pennsylvania. York, there were a bunch of roads that radiated from it. And this road right here that came out of York is, this is the Manawan Road. It was laid out in 1750. It led to the Manawan Meeting House, which is a Quaker temple, the Quakers. There's a road that came out and ran across through what is now Abbottstown. And this road entered Adams County here, and it broke off into 2 roads. One that we call the Black's Gap Road that ran through Hunterstown and ran out across through Cashtown and over to Witherspoons or Black's Gap, I guess it's called, and it runs out towards Shippensburg. We have another road that breaks off. It's just outside of New Oxford, Pennsylvania, and it comes through what's now Gettysburg, right here, which is not on this map because it's before Gettysburg, and it runs out down through Hamilton Bond Township. This road, the Marsh Creek Road, was laid out in 1747. There were trails that led to this area prior to this, but this is the road that your family would settle upon, not, and originally in Hamilton's Bond Township. Now, early on, we had churches in this area. By 1750, there was a Quaker church at the old Manawan Meeting House, north of here. And we had 3, or it depends how you count them, 4 distinctive Presbyterian churches. And of course, there were, believe me, I am no religious scholar, but the Presbyterians sort of had a falling out over the years. And you probably know, we have the upper Presbyterians and the lower Presbyterians. And then we had a third group of Presbyterians called the Associate Reformed Presbyterians. I'm sure the falling out was over something simple like the way communion was given. But we had 3 different major groups of Presbyterians in the area. Of course, you guys, your relatives are buried at the Lower Marsh Creek Presbyterian Church. Now we had the Upper Marsh Creek Presbyterian Church, which is more closely aligned today with the Gettysburg Presbyterian Church. And then we have those Associate Reformed Presbyterians, which are associated with a church that was not too far from where I live, a little north of Gettysburg. Originally, Reverend Alexander Dobbin came into the area as the minister of the Associate Reformed Presbyterian Church, which I am told are the liberal Presbyterians. Dobbin was a sort of, liberal. But eventually, the Presbyterians came back together. They had sort of a joining. And Reverend Alexander Dobbin, for a time, was the minister of Upper Marsh, or I should say Great Conewaga Presbyterian Church. That's the other Presbyterian church up there. Great Conewaga near Hunterstown, and Lower Marsh Creek, and the Associate Reformed. And by the end of Alexander Dobbin's life, he presided over a church in downtown Gettysburg that was the United Presbyterians. Believe me, I have no desire to become a historian that knows why the different churches separated and returned together. It's well beyond my capability. But all the churches are named, the Lower Marsh Creek and the Upper Marsh Creek are named after the stream Marsh Creek. And I don't know if you guys took the time to stop at Marsh Creek on your travels. They're working on the bridge there. Did you notice that? Half the bridge is missing. You had to stop at the light? Yes. Okay. Maybe you're stuck there for a while. But I took this picture in the winter. It looks nicer. Whoop. What am I doing there? Didn't turn. Here is one of the earliest illustrations in our area that that is like a historical depiction. This is Marsh Creek, and this is the bridge over Marsh Creek and the Marsh Creek Road, the 1747 road. This bridge, a 5-arch stone bridge, actually dates from 1815. And this is an 1840s illustration. The guy in the photograph whose face is missing, what happened was the family eventually took a CDV of him, they cut his face out, they pasted it onto this painting, but then the face has been lost over the years. So we don't have the face anymore. But this is Colonel John McClellan. The McClellans were early Scotch-Irish settlers in this area, and the McClellans had a tavern next to the bridge, and it was called Black Horse Tavern. And the tavern, I don't know if I have a picture of it, or maybe I do. It still stands. And it is right east of the bridge over Marsh Creek on the Fairfield Road, or the old Marsh Creek Road. So if you get stopped at the light again coming back this way, you can look to your right and you can see this old stone house. Unfortunately, there are a lot of trees around it and you don't have a very good view of it. Now, I should tell you, that is one of the oldest houses in the area. But the wooden section of the house that undoubtedly dated from the 1740s is ripped off and no longer stands. So the tavern is there. The oldest house that I know of anywhere in this area that still stands is the Laughlin McVeigh house, which we refer to as the Spangler house because the Spanglers lived there at the time of the battle. We usually call things around here the name by which they were called at the time of the battle because we're so oriented on the Battle of Gettysburg, instead of early settlement like some other areas. But the wooden part of this house is thought to date from like 1741. And this is south of Gettysburg on the Baltimore Turnpike, not far from the entrance to the modern National Military Park Visitor Center. Of course, the Dobbin House, and I know you guys talked about Reverend Alexander Dobbin. He came to this area in 1774, and the Dobbin House, the stone building, was built in 1776. And here's my color postcard of it from around 1904. I love my postcards. There's another picture of it. And maybe some of you have eaten at the Dobbin House. Of course, I should point out that there's no chance that your relatives ate at the Dobbin House, because it was not a tavern until 1980. I think the Reverend Alexander Dobbin might be a little bit concerned that his house is now a tavern. Everybody thinks it's a historic tavern. But if you wanted to go to the tavern where your relatives may have hung out at, they lived like a few miles from, you got to try to knock on the door of that McClellan house, the Black Horse Tavern. That's where they might have hung out. If you imagine your relatives going to a tavern. Of course, you know, at the time they lived here, taverns were the places you went for public meetings, to elect officials. You know, that is the place you would go to hear news, where they would organize units that were being pulled together for the French and Indian War or the American Revolution. Taverns were very important places in the area. There weren't a lot of towns at that time. Of course, Reverend Alexander Dobbin is buried at the Lower Marsh Creek Cemetery. And I don't know if anybody did you wander over to Reverend Alexander Dobbin's grave while you were in there?
We did.
Dedicating it
Yes,
to sons?
Very
good. Very good. And I know you learned about the church, so I'm not going to talk about the church. The Upper Marsh Creek Presbyterian Church no longer stands, the original. I guess like the Lower Marsh Creek original church no longer stands. It's on Belmont Road, a few miles north of the Lower Marsh Creek. And you can see that also this was a Scotch-Irish cemetery. There's John Black, settled in Marsh Creek, 1736. And his wife of John Black. These stones obviously are replacement stones. Also, you might notice that this is where Samuel Geddes is buried. Samuel Geddes being the father of the man who founded our county seat, Gettysburg, which was not founded until 1786. And then, of course, we have McClellan Cemetery, which was one of the oldest cemeteries in the area. And Revolutionary War soldiers are buried in each of these cemeteries I showed you. McClellan Cemetery is directly behind the old Black Horse Tavern, or the original McClellan house, off of the Fairfield Road. And you have to actually, when you cross over, if you're coming from here and going back over that bridge where there's construction, you make the first left, and you go a couple of 100 yards, and that cemetery is right there. And then in Hunterstown, not far north of here, we have the Great Conewago Presbyterian Church. That church dates from 1780. Remember? I guess Lower Marsh Creek Presbyterian Church, I'm sure you learned today, 1790, I believe. 1789, 1790. So this is 10 years earlier. This is the oldest standing church structure that's still used as a church in the entire county. So most of the older houses, churches, graveyards in this area of our county are all Scotch-Irish Presbyterian related. James Ross is buried at Great Conewago. He died in 1741. So imagine that. He died. That is the earliest stone that I know of. Although there are probably some stones from the 1730s, but you can't read them. You know, there are people buried here before that, but they might not have stones, or you can't read the stones. There are some Germans that are in the southeastern part of our county that also have an early settlement, and they could have older stones, but I cannot read them because of the script in German, or because they're just hard to read. But on James Ross's grave, I wanted to point out this. There's a hand with a sword. And do you see there's blood spurting off the end of the sword? I love that. And this hand, I don't know if you know this, I'm going to talk about this here, but this is not like the cuff of his sleeve. That is the veins of the hand sticking out. Are you familiar with this?
No.
As you go around our county, and I have spent a lot of time in the cemeteries looking at the stones, maybe a little bit too much time. This is called the Red Hand of Ulster. And here are two more depictions of it. Are you familiar with this? Well, maybe some of you are, but I'm going to tell the story anyway. First of all, let me say that this is an Irish folklore. Do you know what that means? It is not true. This is not a true story. I like to tell people that up front. There are several versions of the story. And I'll tell you my favorite version. If you want to see different versions of it, get on the internet and just type in the Red Hand of Ulster, and you can read the 10 different versions or so. Okay? But basically, there were two families in Northern Ireland that were having a dispute over the ownership of a large tract of land in Ulster. And there had been some bloodshed. And the two families got together and decided that this had to end, that there had to be some kind of resolution. So they decided that each family would put forth a representative. And the representatives would have a series of challenges that they would have to go through, a series of trials. And whichever family's representatives won the contests, kind of like an Olympics, then that family would take ownership and to that piece of land they were squabbling over. So both families got the strongest and the smartest representative of their clan. And they had these tests, these trials. And going into the last trial, both families were tied. It would all come down to the two men rowing across a lake. In some versions of the story, it's the North Sea. And whoever was the fastest and their boat, rowboat or something, whatever it was, whoever touched land first would win. So the one family representative and I